Thomas Taylor, the Platonist, than whom no better modern authority on this subject could be cited, says that the initiated were instructed in the doctrine of a state of future rewards and punishments. Footnote. Dissertation on the Eleusinian and Bacchic mysteries, Apud, Pamphleteer, Volume 8, page 40. And that the greater mysteries, obscurely intimated by mystic and splendid visions, the felicity of the soul both here and hereafter, when purified from the defilements of a material nature and constantly elevated to the realities of intellectual vision. Footnote. Ibid, page 53. All the ancient writers were contemporary with these associations, and must have been familiar with their character, concur in the opinion that their design was to teach the doctrine of a future life of compensation. Pindar says, "Happy the man who descends beneath the hollow earth, having beheld these mysteries." He knows the end, he knows the divine origin of life. Sophocles says that they are thrice happy who descend to the shades below, after having beheld these rites, for they alone have life in Hades, while all others suffer there every kind of evil. And lastly, Isocrates declares that those who have been initiated in the mysteries of Ceres entertain better hopes both as to the end of life and the whole of futurity. It is then evident from all authorities that the great end and design of the initiation into these mysteries was to teach the aspirant the doctrine of a future life, not that aimless, uncertain, and shadowy one portrayed by the poets and doubtfully consented to by the people, but that pure and rational state of immortal existence in which the soul is purified from the dross of the body and elevated to eternal life. It was, in short, much the same in its spirit as the Christian and Masonic doctrine of the resurrection. This lesson was communicated in the mysteries in a peculiar form, which has in fact given rise to the theory we are now considering, that they were the antitype and original source of speculative Masonry. They were all dramatic in their ceremonies, each one exhibited in a series of scenic representations the adventures of some god or hero, the attacks upon him by his enemies, his death at their hands, his descent into Hades or the grave, and his final resurrection to renewed life as a mortal, or his apotheosis as a god. The only important difference between these various mysteries was that there was to each one a different and peculiar god or hero, whose death and resurrection or apotheosis constituted the subject of the drama, and gave to its scenes the changes which were dependent on the adventures of him who was its main subject. Thus, in Samothrace, where the mysteries of the Kabiri were celebrated. It was Attis, the lover of Cybele, who was slain and restored. In Egypt, it was Osiris, whose death and resurrection were represented. In Greece, it was Dionysus, and in Persia, Mithras. But in all of these, the material points of the plot and the religious design of the sacred drama were identical. The dramatic form and the scenic representation of the allegory were everywhere preserved. This dramatic form of the initiatory rites in the mysteries, this acted allegory in which the doctrine of the resurrection was shadowed forth by the visible representation of some fictitious event, was, as the learned Dr. Dollinger, footnote, Jew and Gentile, 1, page 136, Darnell's translation, has justly observed, eminently calculated to take a powerful hold on the imagination and the heart, and to excite in the spectators alternately conflicting sentiments of terror and calmness, of sorrow and fear and hope. As the mysteries were a secret society whose members were separated from the rest of the people by a ceremony of initiation, there resulted from this form of organization, as a necessary means of defense and of isolation, a solemn obligation of secrecy, with severe penalties for its violation, and certain modes of recognition known only to those who had been instructed in them. There was what might be called a progressive order of degrees, for the neophyte was not at once, upon his initiation, invested with a knowledge, the deepest arcana of the religious system. Thus, the mysteries were divided into two classes, called the lesser and the greater mysteries, and in addition there was a preliminary ceremony, which was only preparatory to the mysteries proper, so that there was in the process of reception a system of 3 steps, which those who are fond of tracing analogies between the ancient and the modern initiations are prone to call degrees. A brief review of these 3 steps of progress in the mysteries will give the reader a very definite idea of the nature of this ancient system, in which so many writers have thought that they had found the incunabulum of modern Freemasonry, and will enable him to appreciate at their just value the analogies which these writers have found, as they suppose, between the two systems. The first step was called the lustration, or purification by water. When the neophyte was ready to be received into any of the ancient mysteries, he was carried into the temple or other place appropriated to the ceremony of initiation, and there underwent a thorough cleansing of the body by water. This was the preparation for reception into the lesser mysteries, and was symbolic of that purification of the heart that was absolutely necessary to prepare the aspirant for admission to a knowledge of and participation in the sacred lessons which were to be subsequently communicated to him. It has been sought to find in this preparatory ceremony an analogy to the first degree of Masonry. Such an analogy certainly exists, as will hereafter be shown, but the theory that the apprentice's degree was derived from and suggested by the ceremony of lustration in the mysteries, is wholly untenable, because this ceremony was not peculiar to the mysteries. Ablution, lustration, or cleansing by water, as a religious rite, was practiced among all the ancient nations. More especially was it observed among the Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans. With the Hebrews, the lustration was a preliminary ceremony to every act of expiation or sin offering. Hence, the Jewish prophets continually refer to the ablution of the body with water as a symbol of the purification of the heart. Among the Greeks, lustration was always connected with their sacrifices. It consisted in the sprinkling of water by means of an olive or a laurel branch. Among the Romans, the ceremony was more common than among the Greeks. It was used not only to expiate crime, but also to secure the blessing of the gods. Thus, fields were lustrated before the corn was put into the ground, colonies when they were first established, and armies before they proceeded to battle. At the end of every 5th year, the whole people were thus purified by a general lustration. Everywhere the rite was connected with the performance of sacrifice and with the idea of a moral purification. The next step in the ceremonies of the ancient mysteries was called the initiation. It was here that the dramatic allegory was performed and the myth or fictitious history on which the peculiar mystery was founded was developed. The neophyte personated the supposed events of the life, the sufferings, and the death of the god or hero to whom the mystery was dedicated, or he had them brought in vivid representation before him. These ceremonies constituted a symbolic instruction in the initia, the beginnings of the religious system which it was the object of the mysteries to teach. The ceremonies of initiation were performed partly in the lesser, but more especially and more fully in the greater mysteries, of which they were the first part, and where only the allegory of death was enacted. The lesser mysteries, which were introductory to the greater, have been supposed by the theorists who maintain the connection between the mysteries and Freemasonry to be analogous to the fellow crafts degree of the latter institution. There may be some ground for this comparison in a rather inexact way, for although the lesser mysteries were to some extent public, yet as they were, as Clemens of Alexandria says, footnote, Stromat 5, page 424, a certain groundwork of instruction and preparation for the things that were to follow, they might perhaps be considered as analogous to the fellow crafts degree. The third and last of the progressive steps or grades in the mysteries was perfection. It was the ultimate object of the system. It was also called the autopsy, from a Greek word which signifies seeing with one's own eyes. It was the complete and finished communication to the neophyte of the great secret of the mysteries, the secret for the preservation of which the system of initiation had been invented, and which during the whole course of that initiation had been symbolically shadowed forth.